チベット自由人権日本百人委員会主催の講演会、これから開会をさせていただきたいと思います。それでは、ゲデプトゥンドゥプ殿下、講演をお願いいたします。講演のテーマは、チベット闇に葬られた50年ということで、当会の代表幹事のペマ・ギャルポ先生が通訳をしてくださいます。
Honorable guests, friends,
ご来賓の皆様、友人の皆様、
members of Committee of 100,
百人会の皆様、
it's a pleasure to be here.
お招きいただき、大変光栄に存じます。
We have been, this year 2009 is a very important year. We have been 50 years under Chinese domination, and we have been 50 years in exile. You see, these 50 years, His Holiness in his March 10th speech has said that in Tibet today it's hell on earth, but Beijing says that in Tibet today it's paradise on earth. So for every year, March 10th, 1959 is a remembrance day for all the Tibetans who died in the uprising in 1959. But Beijing is going to commemorate its invasion and serf emancipation day in March this year. Just to give you a quick history lesson, prior to 1959, Tibet was an independent country. But these 50 years as a Chinese colony, the Chinese have completely misruled Tibet. Inside Tibet today, there is completely, our people are being suppressed. There are around 500,000 military troops stationed inside Tibet today. Beijing is continuing having a patriotic re-education program and a strike hard program taking place inside Tibet today. In spite of this, the Tibetan people's resolve and their spirit is still very high. We can see this from last year and the March uprisings. The Chinese communists do not realize or understand after 50 years what the Tibetan people want. We Tibetans want our basic human rights, freedom of religion. In 1959, when the first uprising took place, they killed more than 80,000 Tibetans. In 1989, when the protest took place in Lhasa, they did the exact same thing, the use of force. In 1990, I was in Beijing and met Mr. Hu Jintao. During the meeting, I asked him, why did you crack down in Lhasa in 1989? And he said, my hands were tied because I asked Beijing and Beijing said to crack down. But in 2008, the Tibetan leadership in the month of March, they were in Beijing for the National People's Congress. So when the Tibetans protested peacefully, you see, they asked Beijing, the Tibetan leadership, and the Tibetan leadership asked Hu Jintao, and Hu Jintao said, crack down. That's why Beijing has no other solution for Tibet but to use force. In the last 30 years, that means starting from 1979, we started a dialogue with Beijing. In 1979, my father, Gyalo Thondrup, was called to Beijing to meet Deng Xiaoping. In 1980, His Holiness told me to go with my father to be a witness towards these meetings. So Mr. Deng Xiaoping told my father to convey to His Holiness that apart from independence, all issues can be negotiated and resolved. During the first round of negotiations, which were basically from 1979 till 1994, His Holiness sent numerous fact-finding delegations into Tibet. And we found out the exact position of what happened between 1959, the year the Dalai Lama left, to 1979. When our delegations came back, they were shocked at the death and destruction which took place in these 20 years. But we took stock of what happened in those 20 years. For instance, I give you an example. We had over 6,000 monasteries, and after 1979, there were only a handful existing. But what did we achieve in those 15 years? We opened the borders of Tibet and we reunited our families. And His Holiness had a direct channel to Beijing. And we negotiated many things, but in the end, in 15 years, we agreed to disagree on everything. After 1994, we stopped this dialogue as it was leading, as His Holiness felt this was leading nowhere. But at the end of 2002, we started a dialogue again with His Holiness sending fresh envoys to Beijing. So after 8 rounds, His Holiness had presented Beijing with a memorandum. So his demands were very simple, as they were within the limits of the Chinese constitution. For instance, he wanted all the Tibetan areas to be reunited and to demilitarize Tibet by removing, Chinese military troops, and to control the influx of Han Chinese into Tibet, and ways and means to maintain the Tibetan identity and culture and tradition. So for 50 years in exile, we are the most successful refugees in the world. And let me tell you why. You see, we have the most pragmatic leader in his person, the Dalai Lama. And in 50 years, we have the ability to create sympathy all over the world. We have numerous international support with 60 Tibet support groups in 60 different countries. But in these 50 years, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has had one uphill struggle. And Beijing doesn't realize what the Dalai Lama really represents. The only time they have really met him is in 1954 when he visited Beijing for the first time. So in 1959, the Dalai Lama escaped from Tibet to India. In 1979, he dealt directly with Deng Xiaoping. And in 89, when the riots took place, he dealt with Chiang Zemin. But in 2009, Hu Jintao is president of China, and we have dealt with him directly. Beijing's present policy in Tibet vis-a-vis religion is very hardline. Religion is a poison. Beijing has an organization called the State Affairs Religious Council. So just a few days ago, Beijing has announced that they will appoint their own Dalai Lama in the event of the 14th Dalai Lama passing away. But this is sure to fail. Let me just explain to you about the appointment of the Panchen Lama. In 1989, when the 10th Panchen Lama, the great 10th Panchen Lama, passed away, during that year, later that year, I was in Beijing, and His Holiness requested Beijing to let us cooperate together to find the next Panchen Lama. So Beijing agreed to this and says, His Holiness asked Beijing to appoint a person to find the next Panchen. So this High Lama, who was appointed by Beijing, found 3 candidates, and Beijing agreed to the first candidate and said that they have complete agreement, and His Holiness also agreed to the first candidate. The High Lama, who found the first candidate, asked me to take a letter back to His Holiness, requesting His Holiness to announce to the world the choice of the Panchen. But because of Beijing not agreeing to His Holiness making this announcement, they purposely took the number 2 candidate as their candidate. I'm giving you this example to show you how Beijing feels about religion. So Beijing's appointed Panchen Lama now has an identity crisis, because he knows that he has been appointed by Beijing and that he does not have this acknowledgement of the Dalai Lama, and he doesn't have the mandate of the Tibetan people. So that's why I want to say that in the event of the passing away of the great 14th Dalai Lama, no Tibetan will accept Beijing's puppet.